We're talking to Eric Cupp today. Eric's from Bridgewater Studios. This is a company that makes and fabricates kind of very unique, one-of-a-kind items for companies. You could think about like displays in a retail store. They make items for events, statues and signage and lights. They make things for museums. You can picture like interactive displays and when you're in a museum, or like picture a children's museum where there might be little things that kids can like get their hands on and use and experiment with. This is kind of a very unique design fabrication firm making lots of neat things with every imaginable material, including 3D printing, of course, all types of metal and steel fabrication and wood and plasters and cements and just all of it. Really fascinating stuff. And Eric's a great guy, and I really appreciate him coming on to tell us more about this world. So without any further ado, here's Eric Cupp from Bridgewater Studios. And my first question for you, and I know we'll get to more details, but I definitely would talk about 3D printing. But
Yep.
your business in general operates in what seems like it's simultaneously unique because you're using so many processes and materials, but it's also in terms of craftsmanship, it seems like almost like the epitome of craftsmanship because all of these different processes and materials you're almost having to define the standards, like a plumber, there's like very strict codes. This is what
Sure.
things should look like. So anyways, maybe you should just give some background to the listeners on what kind of things you guys are making and how craftsmanship like interacts with your business and what you're making. And then of course, we'll talk about the 3D printing side of this soon enough.
Yeah, no, that's great. A company, our company is basically we're a custom manufacturer, custom fabrication shop. Those terms get used all over the place. I say that we're engineered to order, and the markets that we serve can be, anywhere from a cultural institution like a museum to direct to brand, Nike, Under Armour, any of those people that want to create an experience. And that's really what we do is we create experiences that people in the world interact with, whether it's a museum exhibit, a store display, a big sculpture, public art. And, my background, actually, I came out of theater. So, I always tell people it's basically scenery for the real world. And, within these jobs, there's, different levels of finish. It's all, much as with any project, it's driven by budget, by time. There's this amalgamation of parameters that get placed on any project, and we figure it out for each one. It's unique, and we use, very much all of the trade kind of skills, whether it be carpentry, metalwork, electrics, and they get integrated into these experience designs to make something that people find interesting and enjoy, and have them kind of connect with the world and look at things differently. So it's this really great blend of technology, fabrication, and art.
Yeah, like the ultimate blend of those, because like I said, with building codes, it's always black and white. Like this is what
Right.
a water heater installation should, you have these three things. But for you on a store display, for example, it's a little more fuzzy. And I guess it's just satisfying the designer and the client. And I guess how you get there, you have some flexibility in how exactly it's created. Is that right? Or do they
Oh
give you
yeah,
like
definitely.
pretty strict, like we want it made out of steel and we want it this and this, or do you kind of solve those problems and then tell them what you're going to do?
I mean, that's really, where we add value and where we come in with a customer is to, act like the comparable would be the general contractor.
Mm-hmm.
And, we live in the same world as all of those trades, and that we have to, we have structural engineers look at things. If we do something that's big and outside, we have to make sure that it's wind loading has been calculated so it doesn't blow over. And anything that requires LED lighting or mechanics or anything like that, it all has to meet all the same codes. But where it's unique is that it's not it's not like, oh, we're gonna run all this pipe and pull wire and all this stuff. It's like,
Yeah.
how, like how, but honestly, that's what we love about that's what draws us to the projects is
Huh.
um, that problem solving and like figuring it out. And, we don't really make the same thing over and over again. So it really keeps the
Wow.
work fresh and it's exciting.
Yeah, no kidding. So maybe you mentioned like store displays, and actually,
Hmm.
this is funny. You mentioned museums. I was at a aquarium last summer on like a family trip, and since I've been more involved with kind of craftsmanship and building from this side now of making content about it, I was really admiring the displays in a way I had never done before. They had these like little wave machines that kids could like create these little model tsunamis and knock over Legos. And I was looking at all of that, and they had like little sensors telling you, how much pressure and all these things that I was really admiring. And it occurred to me, who built all this? I kind of looked at the museum docents and thought like, well,
We do.
yeah, but so in other words, that would be one example of the types of things you guys are doing. Can you like rattle off some more specifics of kind of interesting jobs and things that you've created that people maybe would be familiar with conceptually, but never occurred to them, the guys who had to, scratch their head and figure it out?
Yeah, for sure. It's funny. You basically described one of my kind of static taglines with people is that when you're out in the world and you see something, you're like, I wonder who makes that. It's
Yeah.
usually it's a company like us or us, and
Huh.
so basically those what you're describing is a water table that you saw at the museum, and we call that an interactive display. So obviously, it's meant to interact with people,
Uh-huh.
and they're complicated machines. We did something very similar recently for the Museum of Science and Industry for an exhibit all around friction, and you say to yourself like, what's exciting about friction? Well, it's interesting. I mean, each material, as we all know, has different coefficients of friction, and kind of communicating these science concepts and these to children and teaching them about them kind of allows them to see how these things manifest themselves in everyday life. Like, oh, like leather is
Mm.
more abrasive than plastic. And so basically we made a large tilting table that had different size like hockey pucks with different materials on them, and the table tilted back and forth, and it was basically like a race. And you
Wow.
could kind of the science associated with it was that you could set the degree of the table and see like which one moved first on the table, and kind of make a hypothesis, and kind of that teaching and guided discovery is like the hallmark of science museums. So a lot of the things when we get a project like that, the ask or the concept is like, oh, it's really simple, and then you're tasked with making something that lasts for 30 years,
Yeah.
that gets touched by, I don't know, a few thousand people a day in a museum, by children who are the most destructive force
Oh,
in nature, right?
yeah,
It's
they're
children
brutal.
than water.
Yeah, they're brutal. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, you're right. In fact, that one mentioned, it's like kids using water. So that
Right.
machine is toast. I don't know how it's lasted this long. Wow. That's
Well,
really
honestly, and a lot of that, we follow that same process where it's prototyping, engineering, prototyping, testing, and then you're like, oh, have I made a water table before? Well, I've made a water thing before, so how is that similar?
wow.
Um, so
Well, that
yeah, and I mean, we engineer everything in SolidWorks, and high levels of shop drawings, and it's really all of the people that work in machine shops or stuff like that. It's we use all those processes to develop very technical exhibits like that, but they're like one-offs. So
wow.
that's what kind of makes it cool.
Was that a software that you described, that you said that you used? I can't remember what you said. You develop it in, was it a software
Oh,
platform first?
SolidWorks. Yeah,
Oh,
that's
SolidWorks.
software. So it's parametric design software that we can, and it allows you to rapidly iterate and change. Make it's the same stuff that they use for making automobiles or really
Oh, okay.
complicated assemblies or things like that. And
Wow.
it's part of our digital workflow as a company, which for companies like us, we really embraced when we started the company. It was very obvious that the way to stay competitive in general is to just be as technology forward as we could be.
Yeah.
So, making complete simulations and high level, highly technical shop drawings and engineering drawings allows us to, it's the same stuff all these other manufacturers do, but they'll take years to develop a product.
Right.
We do it in a few weeks or a few months, or, if we're working for
Wow.
a TV show, a few days.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. TV shows would be another type of customer who has a need for these things. So I guess in this industry, let's say these people are used to finding a. I guess that's why the company's a studio, because it's a combination of. It's not quite a shop because you're also creating the I don't know, the more you're concerned about the aesthetics and the appearance of these things, maybe a little more than a traditional. When I think of fabrication shop, I think of a metalworking,
Of
shop
course.
building trailer frames. But fabrication is the right word because you're creating these things out of nothing. So, is it difficult to, number one? Can you talk about how you find these types of multi-skilled people in your team? Because these are not your typical skilled trades. They probably have a little more varied skills in each person. And number two, how do you approach like even bidding or having conversations with these big companies? Like, I want something like this. I'm guessing sometimes they don't even know exactly what they want, maybe, and you have to help them get there. So this is much different than most trades. And how do you cross each of those bridges?
Fearlessly would be the short answer. Is that,
Yeah.
but that's part of the challenge. There are a lot. We work for a lot of general contractors who are like, oh my god, like, what is this custom? I don't even know how. It doesn't fall into, like, I can't have my drywall guy do this, and like the electrician is gonna like be like, what the heck?
Yeah.
So they'll be like, how do I find somebody that does that? And
Yeah.
when we've had relationships like that, we tend to a lot of word of mouth. Everybody talks to each other. It's like, oh, I
Right.
got a guy for that. I mean, when I want a plumber, I call my electrician. Hey, do you know a plumber?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
And finding, speaking to finding people, it's actually it's challenging, but at the same time, the work is kind of unique. So people that enjoy this kind of work I've found are kind of always kind of looking for their place.
Yeah.
And they might be in we've had people that have worked in cabinet shops. We work with plastic laminate and veneers, and
Yeah.
we CNC cut parts. And when I advertise when I look to fill positions, if it's a shop person, I usually, like you said, it's tough. I usually try to my ad is typically for a cabinet maker.
Okay.
And within that position, cabinet making skills is somebody that's used to working in a shop. They're used to doing high end work. They're used to doing installations, because we shop
Uh-huh.
fabricate everything. We're like a millwork company on steroids, I guess.
That's a really smart way. And they're all cabinet shops are used to like a white glove installation and having a homeowner who's very particular. And
Yeah.
that in some ways is maybe more difficult to teach than the shop skills, is just the mindset of care, and they would come with that if they've done kitchens before, I guess.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, we avoid working in people's homes as much as possible. We
Yeah.
have done some really high end home stuff, but um, it's real. It's just tough work. But like you
Yeah.
said, when you find people that have that methodology to
Yeah.
how they approach their craft, and then ideally you find somebody that like is really good at that, but man, they like would love to learn, or they have done metal work, or
Hmm.
kind of the people that we tend to find are people that just like to create. And
Yes.
they tend to tinker. Some people might be more into technology. Other people, it's actually one of the really cool things, because we get people in, and it's great to see how their skills overlap and complement. And
Mm.
yeah, it makes our team a really cool group of people, because they're all like, one of the
Yeah.
guys we work for did like dioramas for high end, or they might be model
Oh.
shop people if they worked in a prototyping shop, or
Oh,
um,
wow.
yeah, it's kind of all over the place.
Yeah, that's neat. I always, you meet people who have lots of skills and interests, but even just someone who knows about what's possible, even if they can't do it, like someone who's maybe not a welder, but they know we could find a fabricator to CNC this, and actually aluminum can be welded in this way, like almost just knowing these things are possible. And I compare that to some tradesmen who are so good at their trade, and they really don't care about learning or doing the other things. Like they want to touch their tools in their trade, and so there might be two different types of people in that regard, and you would be more sniffing out the ones who I don't know about open minded, but are at least paying attention to the other trades across the room.
I tend to classify it as curiosity.
Yeah,
There are some people that, and I have an appreciation for craft, but believe me, I mean, there's, you know, when you're good at something, if that's what you enjoy doing and that's what you want to do, absolutely
yeah,
do it. But, if you're kind of, me, I tend to have a low attention span or a short attention span. So, I was
yeah,
always like, all right, well, cool, let's do this so I can do the next thing. Um,
yeah. That's
I kind
kind
of
of be
always
kind of
wanted.
a tough. It's not tough. It's part of your business, but most shops can build out like jigs and systems and processes once, and then use them for a long time. But are you kind of like in between jobs, basically like wiping the slate clean, more or less, and it's a totally different thing next time, or are there some things you build that are more or less routine that you can that you've tooled up for once and you can still use?
I think the only jig or fixture we use consistently is a square. But yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. We don't manufacture a product. Um, but however, again, we're clever about doing things. So, and using the CNCs, whether it be the fiber laser or the CO2 lasers,
Mm,
or the routers or whatever, when we make, since we're making these custom things, we're always thinking about the workflow in the shop and making the process as efficient as possible. So we do cut tons of jigs.
uh-huh.
We'll cut things out for drill placement out of cardboard or styrene
Hmm.
or plywood. And then say like, hey, so, or we cut all the parts. We engineer it to the level and we cut all the parts out of plywood, and it's like, here's all the parts, staple them together, and
Yeah.
so that kind of like layout aspect. I mean, when I started my career, I remember taking a drawing and drawing 1/4 inch squares on it, and then drawing 1 foot squares on a piece of plywood and cutting it out with a jigsaw, right? I mean, that's like,
Hmm.
you know enlargement 101. Now we take a picture of something, throw it in CAD, trace over it, send it to the CNC machine, and like,
Yeah.
here you go.
That's amazing. I still think of, or I do think of 3D printing as like this new and I don't know, wild west frontier of craftsmanship. I know it's been around a little while though. So can you talk about how long it's been around, how it's been evolving, and where it's at now, and to what extent you guys are, using those? And I'm thinking parts in I'm thinking in particular of like the plastic type of 3D
Hmm.
printing where it layers the plastic, but I know there's other types. Even CNC could almost be thought of the way it kind of moves and cuts out stuff. It's certainly a robot, but in any case, tell us about 3D printing, kind of how when that showed up on your radar in this world, and how you guys are utilizing it now.
I mean, 3D printing in some shape has been around for actually a really long time. It's just not been accessible. Much as with new technology, it's insanely expensive, um, and difficult for the common person to
Hmm.
really, you don't see it out of a huge industrial situation where people spend millions of dollars on it. Where
Yeah.
when we started the company, we actually, I think our first 3D printer that we bought was probably 6 months into starting the company, because we got a project in and we looked at it and we were like, how are we going to do this? And 7 years ago, to me, was kind of the beginning of the accessibility to the masses for 3D
Okay.
printing. And at that point, it was really kind of magical. And we bought an FDM machine, which is ones that most people are familiar with now, where it takes plastic, it heats it in an extruder, and it lays down,
Yes.
layer after layer after layer, and builds a structure upon that. And
Yeah.
when we got that thing, we were like, this is crazy.
Yeah.
Like, it's a little magic box.
Yeah.
You come back and had a camera on it, and you just watched it for a day, and oh my god, I set this to print at 4 o'clock, and I got there in the morning, and ta-da, it was
There's your
there.
piece. Wow.
Yeah, there's your piece. And it was actually that specific project. We were making a replica of a giant spider crab for a traveling museum exhibit. And if you don't know anything about spider crabs,
Huh.
they can be like 6 feet in diameter. They're insane.
Oh.
They're enormous. It's basically a remnant of a prehistoric, you know.
Is that the same as a coconut crab? Like those really like blocky ones. Or maybe that's different. I don't know why I'm thinking coconut crab. I think I
To
know what
be
you're talking
honest,
about.
I'm not the crab expert.
Well,
I do, however, know a little bit more about giant spider crabs, since we had to do it,
yeah. Well, 6 feet. That's blowing my mind. I thought the
right?
coconut crabs were like a foot or two, but 6 feet is all of a sudden I'm freaking out. Like, are they in Oregon? But
Right? No, no,
go.
no, no. So this was, and actually, to speak to that, this was for an exhibit called Alien Worlds and Androids. So they,
Huh.
the connection there was, you know, we have this thing on Earth that looks like an alien. It's a crab that's 6 feet in diameter. If you didn't know it was, if you just saw it, you would be like, oh my God, this is,
And so they
are we
came to
being
you like,
invaded?
we want a life size 6 foot crab. Can you do that? And you're like, uh,
Sure.
yes. How? Let me think about it. And is that when the printing came like into the
Absolutely.
shop?
The
Huh.
client calls and says, we need this. And we go, oh yeah, no problem. And you hang the phone up and go, how the hell are we going to do this?
Yeah.
But that's,
Wow.
that's kind of the challenge, and, what's really, we find engaging. And, it was like, all right, well, we can afford these 3D printers aren't hundreds of thousands of dollars anymore.
Yeah.
I can't remember. I think we spent $5,000 on the first one, which was at the time, a lot of money to us. But
Yeah.
I mean, we made all these parts and we put them together, and, it was completely accurate, and,
Wow.
the customer loved it. you
Wow.
know so in my opinion, that the 3D printing in particular, that was a big plateau about 5 or 6, 7 years ago. It kind
Yeah.
of got to the masses, and, it's slowly been going up and up. The SLA machines, which is stereolithography, which uses a laser to, like the form machines, which uses basically a laser to cure resin, which
Oh.
creates like really highly accurate parts with lots of detail.
Oh.
And I've been kind of waiting around for the past couple years, because it's been a slow kind of climb, and I feel like this past year we hit another plateau, which we acquired the current industrial machines that we have. And the cool thing about those is that they're giant. For us, if you're a jewelry maker, or a dentist,
Yeah.
or somebody that's a small manufacturer, having a build, calling the build volume, which is like maybe a, 6 by 6 by 8 inches, like, is really cool.
Yes.
But for us, where we make full scale objects, having a build volume of 2 foot by 2 foot by 5 feet, now that's cool.
Wow. I didn't realize they could be that big. Huh.
And well, it depends on the technology. Right
Yeah.
now there are different manufacturers out there that make FDM machines that are insanely big. They're the size of, I don't know, your bathroom. I don't know how big your
Yeah.
bathroom is, but, a sizable room.
Small. Yeah.
And, it can print over time. An object that could be several feet, almost life size to a person.
Wow.
Um, the challenge with that technology is that in order for it to be effective, it lays down rather thick layers. And, because it slices, it takes an object and it slices it into different parts and basically stacks it up.
Yes.
And from a manufacturing or production standpoint, getting a product that kind of layered look, you typically, the customer doesn't want that.
Right.
So it requires additional hand finishing, filling, sand, basically body work. you
Yes.
know
Huh.
we
Interesting.
tend to call it like, oh, we got to do the body work on this thing.
So you're sanding out all those layers and filling it up with compounds if you can't get in there to smooth it
Yeah, I
out
mean, we
and
use
that kind of
Bondo a
thing.
lot, fiberglass, a
Huh.
whole variety of things depending on it. So
Huh.
while it's great and awesome from a like, hey, wow, there's this thing that appears, you're not done.
Yeah.
And much as with everything, we all know that materials are expensive, but labor is the most expensive thing.
Yeah.
Um,
Wow. So let's say your machine is 2 feet, 2 feet by 5 feet. Can you make like with that crab multiple parts and then you design a way for them to fasten together as part of what it prints, like little, I don't know, like dovetails or something like that? Or
Yeah,
how does that work?
absolutely. I mean, so the machines that we have now are, they're actually, and that's why we got them, is that they're this SLA machine, that they're actually, the layer height that it puts down is 4/10,000ths of a millimeter.
Wow.
It's insane. So,
Whoa.
but and the way they do that is they use a laser with a mirror. They call it a galvo laser, and it just moves really, really quickly. And the great thing about them is that that step that I said was always the challenge with FDM machines is that they come off the machine and you're just like, oh, I'm going to take a piece of 120 grit and just knock off some high spots and we can paint it.
Wow.
But to answer your question specifically, yeah, absolutely. I mean, the tolerances on these, as I mentioned, since they are so tight,
Uh-huh.
you can in the design process, you can take and make them snap together, go together. You have to allow weep holes for the resin because you're building this thing from basically the bottom up, and
Right.
as you build it, you don't want resin to pool in there. It has to, so you have to build in weep holes to allow the resin to come out. Well, you
Huh.
just print the plugs to plug the weep holes as part of the
Huh.
printing process, and
Okay.
when you take the part off, you just glue those in.
Yeah.
Kind of the same way like you would with a plug in a wood dowel with a screw in a
Right.
piece of
Yeah.
furniture. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And then make it go away with sanding and a little touch up or
Yep.
something.
Yeah,
Wow.
we'll use automotive paints, high build primers, stuff
Yeah.
like that.
So what are you guys doing at World of Concrete? And I think the guy at your booth talked about concrete forms and using 3D printing to interface with that. So how does that work?
The world of concrete, we actually, it was a shot in the dark for me. I saw the show and I was like, man, this is such a cool show. They're literally like power plating stuff out in the parking lot, and you can,
Yeah, they had a batch plant set up in the park. 3D printing, you saw that big house
yeah,
printer they had set up. For people who didn't see that video, but they were they set up a batch plant and were 3D printing a house. I don't know how far into it they got, but
yeah.
they really set up some infrastructure for this show.
It was cool. I mean, so I saw the show, and we'd actually done a couple projects for some cast concrete companies. And in addition to 3D printing, we also have a two Kuka robot carving cell. And
Mm,
they're the same robots they use on the like auto plants. So we'll use those to carve large blocks of EPS foam. People know it as like geofoam. We'll get a billet that's 4 feet by 4 feet by 8 feet. So we got introduced, a cast concrete company reached out to us and said, hey, we have this project and we're making all these planners. And
mm.
each part is different because they're in 4 foot sections, and it's this complicated shape that's becoming a bench. And how do we pattern this?
Mm.
Like, we can't, like, the handwork to go into this. So we actually worked with them to develop the 3D model that got approved by the architect, and then we parted it out in different combinations of positive or negative shapes. If it was a repeatable part, we did a positive shape, and they poured rubber on silicone. They poured rubber, and they are able to, get 10, 5, 10, 20 draws off of it or whatever they needed. If it was a single part, we actually carved the negative of the shape, and they poured right into the concrete. I'm sorry, right into the
Wow,
foam.
right in
Not
the
they poured the
foam.
concrete right into the foam,
Wow, cool.
and then broke the foam off, and then hit it with a cut brush on a wire wheel, and they were
Wow.
done.
Wow, that's neat.
So we saw that, and we're like, there's, and obviously the 3D, the batch plants with the 3D printers and all that stuff is amazing, but for us, where we saw an opportunity was, architects, custom architectural details.
Yeah.
We're able to get with our 3D printers, and we can print again positive or negatives, so that we could, if you have a plinth, or if you're doing a restoration and you've got this amazing part that you need to recreate, we could, we've gone out and 3D scanned stuff and created a model, and then
Yeah.
you basically, high levels of detail, you can pour rubber on it, and yeah, you could make 10, 15, 20 of them, whatever you want.
Wow, that's really neat. I don't know why this is coming to mind. I saw a tweet that last week, somebody saying something silly like, "Why don't they make gargoyles anymore?" And it got me thinking about those. And I was thinking like, "Oh yeah, somebody probably had to carve all those. That's probably a lot of work." And I was kind of like, "Well, it makes sense they don't make them." But now I'm hearing you say this, thinking like, "Hey, make a form, and you
Right.
could pour gargoyles, and we could get those going back up." But that would be the type of thing that you could make a concrete form for that maybe without 3D printing just wouldn't be possible.
I mean, it'd be possible. It's just prohibitive
The
because of,
prohibitive, there you go.
again, it just always goes back to labor. When
Yeah.
gargoyles were made, basically had the equivalent of no labor cost.
Yeah, exactly, slave labor.
Slave labor.
And that was your, those guys doing those were like the previous iteration of a guy like yourself, like somebody saying, "I want this," and then somebody thinking like, "Oh man, how do I create that and get that up there?" There was probably some pretty clever engineering and multi-skilled craftsmen involved with not just creating those, but getting them up there and getting the masons to install them. There's
Absolutely.
probably a lot going on there.
Well, it's, that classic overlap between art and artisan.
Yeah.
And, that stuff was either carved out of limestone, in the churches, they didn't have cast concrete in those days. They would, like, all right, here's your
Right.
block of limestone. We'll see you
Yeah.
in a year when you're done,
Yeah. Don't screw it up. That costs more than your family. So don't break it. Wow. That's really neat. So this is kind of a vague question, but I still am curious. Craftsmanship and what does it kind of mean to you? Because you're really on that line of art and craft and satisfying, the average person who doesn't think about it being made, and you having to keep track of, let's say, like the more nitty gritty quality, like what's a good weld and our, good materials and just the kind of the basic shop skill type of like best practices. So how do you keep track of like what a good job is when that is a little fuzzier? Most people wouldn't know even how to judge, if you finish some display and be like, hey, that was really nice. Or maybe when you have one of your workers doing something, you're like, hey, I know nobody else sees this, but tighten that wiring up a little bit. Do you have any kind of like an instinct on how you would define good craftsmanship in a multi-discipline like setting like what you're in?
Yeah, of course. I mean, honestly, it's, I'm sure it appears to be a lot looser. But if I go into a room and I see somebody putting up drywall and their screws are evenly spaced because they've been doing it for 20 years,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's the same thing. A lot of craftsmanship, in my opinion, comes down to awareness, and then, a desire to create something that is an expression of your proficiency in a given
Mm-hmm.
um, technique, or whatever it is. And, expressing that in a way is reflect. I mean, that's basically our art, right? Is how we do things. So when you make it where it becomes challenging, and, like you said, when you're doing custom things, knowing what is acceptable or what is good is really kind of comes downward from the client. It is challenging because there are times where we build something where it's like, hey guys, this is going to be up for like 2 days because it's for the All-Star game and it needs to look good, but in 2 days we're taking it down and it's getting recycled and going to our recycler. So
Mm-hmm.
and then there's these levels of finish. It has to be communicated from the client, and back to the client from us as well too. Is, again, you speak to a museum exhibit, this thing is ultra super premium. It's going to be there for 30 years. I
Got
mean,
it.
I'll go to the Museum of Science and Industry here in Chicago, and one of the things that I love is in the hallway you can look at exhibits that were there in like the 20s or the 30s,
Wow.
that are like these really kind of complicated machines, and you're like, oh my god, this stuff has been here for so long. So that,
Wow.
when you bid a job like that, having that knowledge of like, okay, this is going to have to last for 30 or 50 years, so we need to make sure that we allocate the appropriate labor and resources to achieve the end result.
Yeah.
Or, hey, this is for the All-Star game, it's going to be up for 2 days, it needs to look good, but it doesn't need to look good for that long. So
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. One of the subcontractors I hired a few years ago, a painter. My favorite things about this guy, Primo is his name. He was the best painter, period, bar none.
yeah.
But he could also give you like a $500 paint job on a house if that's what you want to pay for. He was able to kind of dial in his level of detail, which is not easy. It's being good is a
Can I
challenge
get
on its
his number?
own.
Because he sounds like
Yeah.
a guy I'd like to hire.
Yeah, yeah. Well, he's in Phoenix, but maybe he'll travel.
Yeah.
um, so here's maybe one of my last questions on this. You've worked with these big companies, and you were just talking about them kind of letting you know their expectations or the situation. I've always wondered if these huge companies, just full of hundreds of employees, if
Mhm.
they if and this is going to be case by case, but if they appreciate and if you get the same kind of satisfaction of doing a beautiful job for a Nike display, which I think I saw on your website, which looked
Yeah.
amazing, as when you put in a kitchen for a homeowner who's just in heaven, can't believe their kitchen's done. What's that like with these big companies where there's not maybe like one owner or one person who's everybody's just punching a clock, kind of, it's their job. So what's that
Right.
like working for big companies? Do you ever feel like they are as excited as you are when you deliver the product, or is it case by case?
Most of the, I would say nearly 100% of the time, absolutely, because even though they are these, a large corporation, it's not as personal as dealing with somebody in their home where you can actually see how it affects their daily life. For somebody who's in a creative position at a large brand, or anybody that's creating this experience, they're also, we're kindred spirits as client and customer, or as client and vendor, because they're doing the same thing, but on a supply side, they're supplying us with the work. And
Right.
it's really rare that you get uncreative people in a creative job,
Mm.
right? It's not like we're dealing with, and nothing against accountants, because I need accountants, but it's, that's a
Mhm.
different kind of skill set. And
Yeah.
there's creative accountants. Ours isn't, but you see a
Yeah.
lot of creative accounting out there in the world.
You actually
However,
don't want a creative account. If they're
no,
creative,
no,
keep shopping.
no, absolutely. That's like the one thing I don't want.
Yeah.
However, so in our industry, so you get that. I mean, you build that relationship with the client, and a big, what you normally think of as a faceless company, they have faces.
Mhm.
There's a person, there's a project manager, there's a brand executive, there's the marketing manager, there's the manager of the store. I guess that would, if we're using the analogy of a homeowner, the store manager for a specific brand, if we're putting a store display in, they're the homeowner.
Yeah.
They're the person who has the staff, and you see that. But honestly, much as like any craftsman, we appreciate the thanks, but you have to find satisfaction in your own work. There are times where they're rare. There have been, some times where a customer might not have the response we wanted, but we're like, I don't really care, because this is
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Like you can appreciate it that it exists even if they don't fully. And you're right. It's probably the culture. If the culture of that company can't appreciate it, then there's something wrong because like a marketing person, like they probably feel as much, maybe not as much, but some amount of pride in these things that have been created because they were involved also in bringing it to existence. They came to that job, that display did not exist. One year
Hmm.
later, because of their work, that display exists, even if that means like finding you and getting the job done through you. So there probably is a pretty serious amount of, I don't know, pride and workmanship, even from these, marketing and the people
Oh,
whose
100%.
jobs are
And
more
it's
at the desk.
that partnership that, typically, and much as with everything, when you find a good partner, and
Yeah.
you're able to create something, you kind of feed off of that energy. So,
Yeah.
um,
Well, that's really neat. All right. Well, last question. What are you working on this upcoming year? Do you got any projects that you're really excited about? Anything you can share, and we'll keep track of your, I don't know if you got social media accounts, but it'd
we
be
do,
fun
yeah.
to,
We
okay,
have
good.
Instagram, and
Okay, good.
we,
What's coming?
with us, a lot of the stuff unfortunately tends to be in the rearview mirror, because we can't steal our customers' thunder. So
Right.
since it's always based, so we have a difficult time often
Oh,
sharing exactly what's
yes.
going on. But I can say that we're working on a couple really cool projects for the Children's Museum here in Chicago, around their art studio. We also have some other traveling exhibits for museums. We're consistently doing lots of retail work with brands. Coming back from COVID, it was really exciting, because we've seen all these opportunities come back, and they're
Mm,
coming back with a vengeance, I guess. Because people
yeah.
are starved for interaction and starved for um, doing anything.
Yeah.
So more kind of store displays. There's a lot of we did some stuff for the Super Bowl that was really cool. Um, yeah, it's part of, we don't have, and it's one of the exciting and also one of the terrifying things, is that we don't have years of work lined up.
Yeah.
um but
But
that's
that's like kind of nature of the business for you guys because people don't know what their budget is for next year.
Yeah.
Depends on how this year goes, and so
Or they
that
launch a new product and they're like, oh my god,
yeah.
we want to do this thing because we invented a new, we did a bunch of work for Samsung when the Fold came out.
Mm,
um so it's all about these really kind of, Lollapalooza will come around here in Chicago. I'm sure we'll do some stuff for that. So pick a cultural event, pick a brand that wants to do something to kind of get some exposure or, reward their customers. And there's a good chance we'll do something around that.
And maybe just for the people who are still listening, who are probably the ones who have a reason to be interested, are you guys doing work all over the country? Do you deliver
Oh,
things,
yeah.
to other states? And how do people work with you, even if they're in, Miami and they got an idea? Is that just kind of routine?
I mean, honestly, the past 2 years have made that even easier because there used to be more travel, but much
Yeah.
as doing Zoom and podcasts, it just kind of transitioned that and made that easier because everybody became more comfortable with it. But yeah, I mean, we work all across the country. We send crews out on installations. We just did a couple jobs in LA, Las Vegas, all over the place. And much as with everything, we build everything in the shop, we put it together. If you're installing something, it has to fit through a couple man doors, a big shop door, or whatever. It has to fit in a truck, regardless of who builds it, unless they're doing it on site, which is nobody's going to do that unless it's drywall and steel studs.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, it's actually collaborating is really easy. We send a lot of pictures, we send videos, get on Zoom calls, have great interactions, and we'll travel and install something. So.
That's how the business works. All right. Well, if someone's listening, they got this idea for their company or their job or whatever, their museum or their aquarium, then
if you need something weird, that's what we do.
You would be the person to talk to. If you got an idea, you don't know if it's possible, all these materials, we didn't mention electronics and hydraulics and all these things, but I'm sure that all shows up right along with the lumber and welding and plastics and everything. I really love and admire you guys. And this part of craftsmanship is, to me, it's the essence. It's taking all available technologies, tools, resources, whether they're ancient, like clay and pottery, whether it's brand new, and assembling them to make people happy. I really love it. And we'll link to your website, your Instagram account, and we'll keep in mind that you can't spoil anything. But after the fact, I take it, we can see it after the customer has unveiled it for the
There's
world.
going to be some stuff on TV you'll see that we'll post. That's been really awesome. But yeah, thanks so much. It's again, I love what you're doing here as well too, and I'm grateful to have the opportunity to talk with you. It's been really fun.
All right, it's a pleasure, Eric. Thanks, and we'll do it again someday. Thank you.
Thanks. Talk to you later.
Yep.